Hey, David.
Oh,
Damon, I have made you a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen if you want to see if that
okay,
works for you.
great. Yeah, let me try this.
Yay, perfect.
Okay, great. Hey, I see a couple of familiar faces.
Hey, Damon.
Hey, David. Dr. Tchaikovsky.
Dr. House, that's right. I see a few more
both of
gray
them.
hairs in the beard.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. They're multiplying. So yeah, it's a very high reproductive rate. Like gray beards for sure. So
David's
yeah,
experiencing the same thing, Damon. So
the key is just keep them shaved off. I see that.
keep
Yeah.
it short.
Denial.
Damon,
Yeah,
we
it's good to
are
see you.
recording that seminar if it is okay with you to make it available to students who are in the online program.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm happy to, if there's interest, I can make a PDF of the presentation also.
Oh, okay. Thanks. And then, David, I think Jessica told me that you're interested on staying on after and talking more informally.
Yeah, anyone that wants to stay on is welcome to talk. And
Okay.
I invited grad students and some students in my class. We'll see who's here. And yeah, that'd be good.
Okay, so you can announce that if you'd like at the
Yeah,
end.
okay.
And we'll turn off the recording obviously for that point, and then I'll make probably you the co-host at that point.
Sounds good.
So I'm curious of I shared my screen. I just wanted to just double check that the presentation is displayed properly.
It is. You're probably the first person all semester, but it showed up big right at first.
Dumb luck.
Yeah, usually it shows up in the slide deck and then they have to make it big, but yours, yeah, it looks great.
Okay, great.
I guess that's it. And then we usually take questions in the chat or at the end if people want to unmute, if that works for you.
Yeah, I ran through this recently yesterday, and it was about 50 minutes or so. So hopefully that's okay. I'll try to shorten it where I can. Try not to deviate too much. But as David,
No, yeah, that should be
Kathy
good.
sometimes can just ramble on.
Yeah, 50 minutes is good, and that leaves 10 minutes for questions. The whole thing is about an hour, so yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, great. So I'm curious, is the seminar, is it all online? Is this everybody coming in on Zoom?
This past year, academic year, we've done kind of a mix. So yeah, because no, we've had some speakers in person. That's the you don't care about the details. That's the short summary. Particularly people who are more local and can drive over for the day have come in person. So it's been about half and half this spring.
Okay.
Of in-person and online speakers. But I think, well, right now the email just went out. We're nominating people for next year's seminar series, and I think we're going to continue to allow this Zoom option because for some people, you know, like yourself, who are located really far away, it might really be the only option that makes sense because it would take several days out of your schedule to come in person.
Yeah, it certainly has changed, and it made things like this much more convenient, certainly.
Right. the in-person interaction is nice, and we buy pizza and the students hang out after and have lunch. But it really works best for people who are local, within a few hours of campus. We have a pretty good. So I'm going to check your.
Looks like a pretty good turnout, Thea.
Yes, it does.
Could you explain to Damon maybe a little bit about the online program and how students watch this kind of asynchronously as well?
Yeah, so our department has an online master's in wildlife and fisheries resources, which is a non-thesis degree. So a coursework-based degree that I actually run. And the students are also required to take sort of a seminar course and watch these presentations, but they watch them anytime within the next week of whenever I get the actual Zoom recording. So it reaches a broader audience than the group of people who are able to show up at this particular time as well. And those students are located too all over the US, not just here. Well, and actually we have 2, I think, in Canada now, not just people who are able to be here on campus.
That's great.
All right, I think it is slowed down, David, and it's time if you want to do the introduction.
Great. Well, thank you all for attending today synchronously now, and for those of you listening in later. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Damon Lesmeister. A little bit about Damon. He got his bachelor's degree at the University of Central Missouri, and then his master's at the Great University of Missouri, just a powerhouse of producing excellent wildlife ecologists. And then his PhD at Southern Illinois University. And then he went from there to work for the US Fish and Wildlife Service, to work at Crab Orchard National Wildlife Refuge, and then transitioned to his current place, I believe in 2015, out in Oregon, with the US Forest Service as a research wildlife biologist, leading a team of researchers, and a lot of what he'll talk about today. And it's really exciting because he loves things that are spotted. So his master's was on spotted skunks, now he's on spotted owls. And so it's hopefully we see a nice theme coming out of this. And Damon, I'll turn it over to you. A reminder for those of you on Zoom, we'll be hanging out with Damon afterwards. So we'll have times for questions and other things.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come talk for this seminar series and the invitation here. And talk about some of the work that I've been doing here in the Pacific Northwest and integrating some of this emerging technology, particularly around artificial intelligence and passive acoustic monitoring, all in support of wildlife conservation. And the species that we focus on a lot here in the Pacific Northwest is the spotted owl that you see a photo of here. And so the talk's going to be really focused a lot around spotted owls. And so the northern spotted owl is one of 3 subspecies of spotted owls. They occur in the western United States, and the northern spotted owl shown here in the Pacific Northwest. And so this is very southern British Columbia, western Washington, Oregon, Northwest California. And we also have the California spotted owl and Mexican spotted owls. And spotted owls they're a territorial species, so they have very high site fidelity. They're non-migratory. They have high mate fidelity, and so oftentimes they'll mate for life. And rarely there may be we think as a divorce between a mated pair, but mostly it would be if a mate is lost and may remate. it's a quintessential case-selected species, so a high survival, low fecundity. And one aspect of their biology, natural history, is this association as a old forest obligate. And this has really put them in conflict, and conservation for this species in conflict with human interests, and particularly harvesting old forest because of the high economic value of old forest. So now we have about 5 decades of really intensive science, conservation, and conflict surrounding the northern spotted owl. Here's a photo of my predecessor, Eric Forsman, with a spotted owl, and he began studying spotted owls in the early 1970s, and he discovered many aspects of spotted owl biology that are still important today, both for management, conservation, and sort of underlying with this conflict with the timber industry. And this association he discovered, and also declining populations. In many ways, this directly led to the 1980s. There were these timber wars, and this was a nationally known conflict between the timber industry and conservationists. And if you're interested in this history, certainly can't get into this. There have been countless number of articles written, popular scientific articles, books written. There have been documentaries made. But if you're interested in this, I recommend this podcast. It's a multi-series podcast put on by the Oregon Public Broadcasting called Timber Wars. And they cover a lot of the history and where we are today. And so due to declining populations and loss of habitat, in 1990, the spotted owl, the northern spotted owl, was listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. And soon after that, there was a timber injunction put in place by a federal judge. And this was put in place because there was no plan for managing, especially on federal lands, that would develop to protect spotted owl habitat and also restore enough old forest that spotted owl populations could recover. So following that, in 1994, there was the Northwest Forest Plan that was developed and signed, and it covered the entire range of the northern spotted owl. You see a map here on the right-hand side. The Northwest Forest Plan, as I mentioned, it covered the entire range. So it's 25 million acres of just federal lands that this covered. It didn't cover anything on private or state lands. And it called for a lot of late successional reserves, and there are different types of reserves that are sort of shown here on this map. And in 2020, the Fish and Wildlife Service they determined that spotted owls warranted uplisting to endangered. And so under the Northwest Forest Plan, there was a mandate for monitoring spotted owl populations. And what has been done since the Northwest Forest Plan has been implemented, establishing these long-term demography studies in different parts of the range. And this is a mark resite study, so kind of a typical mark resite. We go out, do callback surveys, mostly from roads at nighttime, get a response from the territorial spotted owl, respond to these territorial recorded calls. Then we do follow-ups, and we mark those individuals, put individual in unique color leg bands. You can see this adult here. You may notice a color leg band there. And so we can recite these individuals, and we'd be able to use these data to estimate parent survival, reproduction, and then be able to pull those together and get population with these lambda estimates. With these callback surveys, we can also now be able to put those data into an occupancy framework, so detection, non-detection data. So we're able to use these long-term data in an occupancy framework. And then there's a meta-analysis that has occurred every 5 years. And so here are the population trends coming from these meta-analyses. So going back to 1993, Burnham led this effort and found that the overall range-wide lambda estimate of about 0.95. And then there have been these other meta-analyses that are shown here. And these are the point estimates of our lambda. So a stable population would be a lambda of 1. And you can see that every one of these point estimates and the confidence intervals are below 1. So we've had a continued population decline. There was a little bit of optimism going back into the Forsman et al. 2011 meta-analysis, where it was still a population decline, but at least that decline was not as steep as it was previously. So there was quite a bit of optimism at that time. Then you fast forward to the meta-analysis in 2016, 2021, and the population conditions have worsened quite dramatically. So we're seeing a precipitous decline in the population, especially over the last 10 years or so. So by 2017, 7 of the study areas had less than 35% of the individuals that were number of individuals on the study areas. 3 of those were less than 50%. So the population has been quite dire. And there's we also have worked on discovering reasons for these population decline. One of them is we have the population stressor, continued loss of old forests. And some of this is through timber harvest. You can see some clear cuts here. There's a photo from the Coast Range in Oregon. And also large wildfires. There's a map of a paper published last year, in the center here. These are it's in the range of the northern spotted owl. The green on the left map there, this is forest lands, or at least habitat capable forests. If it's a clear cut, it would still be counted at this, but it could potentially be into forest. And then the black polygons that are overlaid on top of that are all the large wildfires that occurred from 1987 to 2017. And the next map you see just to the right of this is the historical fire regime. And you see most of these fires have occurred in that fire regime that's in a very frequent regime. Historically, these would have been mostly low severity fires, but some of them become quite high severity. And then you fast forward, and what happened in 2020, you probably heard about this, that there were these 5 huge mega fires that occurred in Oregon that eliminated a lot of old growth forests for spotted owls. And you see a map of those there on the far right. I want to show this. I hope that this will work. I'm going to show this as some of my colleagues at the Forest Service, in partnership with researchers at Oregon State University, developed this time machine or time mapper for disturbances that have occurred from 1987 through 2017. And so I'm hoping that this will work. And this is disturbances of timber harvest and also wildfires. So I'm hoping that I can pull this over. And can we see this? Hopefully. So I'm going to play this video, and what you're going to see is some areas that are going to pop up as green. Those are timber harvest. Some areas that are going to pop up as orange. Those are wildfires. What you see on this map are the gray are federal lands. The other areas are non-federal lands. So I'm going to play this, and you'll see as this sort of plays through from the mid 1980s through the late 2010s. Quite a bit of disturbance that has occurred during this time. It's sort of cycling through here. I'm going to zoom in to an area you can see a little bit better, and I'm actually going to pause this. And so what I noticed that this area is the gray is federal lands. Some of this is the checkerboard country. I won't get into this, but a lot of this is state and private. And so as we move through, you're going to notice a pattern. The green areas, that's the timber harvest, really intensive on the non-federal lands. And this especially starts occurring in the 2000s. And then the yellow and the orange that pops up is wildfires. And that's mostly occurring on the federal lands. And so during this time, even with the Northwest Forest Plan, been a lot of forest disturbance that occurs, and very few acres on non-federal lands have not been touched by timber harvest. There have been quite a lot that's been affected by wildfire. And so this is so with all of this, these stressors with spotted owls, and we also are observing some other things that seem to be some outside of just forest disturbance, but now we have barred owls in the Northwest. Of course, this is a eastern Strix owl species. They have expanded the range and were considered invasive here in the Pacific Northwest. They fully overlap the range of the northern spotted owl. And the concern with barred owls is that they're about 18% larger. They're much more aggressive than spotted owls. They occur at higher densities. So, and when I say at higher densities, for at any given spotted owl home range, you may have 4 to 8 home ranges of pairs of barred owls in that same area. And they're able to do this because they can pack in tighter, have higher densities because it's a generalist species, have a wide range in diet and also the type of forest that they use. And so barred owls have been a lot of documentation, very solid research that very strong indications that barred owls have directly led to decreased spotted owl occupancy. These are occupancy estimates here, this figure from the recent meta-analysis. That these are our different study areas. These are during the duration of the monitoring plan. The kind of the purple lines that you see there, those are occupancy rates of spotted owls, and then barred owls are shown in that yellow bands there. And you can see on every one of our study areas, spotted owls occupancy is declining, barred owls are increasing. Barred owls are much more common on all of our study areas now than our spotted owls. And also decrease in spotted owl survival, reproduction, population size, and detection rates. On top of that, they've also affected breeding dispersal. So breeding dispersal are adult spotted owls that are breeding in that breeding population and moving from one territory to the next. So historically, this would have been because of loss of mate, maybe some forest disturbance. And this occurred about 5 to 7% of the population. This is what you would expect with a species like spotted owls. They have such high site fidelity. And you fast forward to 2016, those dispersal rates have increased to 25%. We're over that now. So this has created an additional sort of instability in the population. And not only are spotted owl breeding birds moving more often, but they're moving further distance. And this is all sort of creating this positive feedback and destabilizing populations because we have lower survival and reproduction in those birds that are dispersing. We're also found in this, a few years ago, we've done this inbreeding study and found that we have higher rates of inbreeding in smaller populations. So it's a real concern with spotted owls, and that it's certainly in some of our populations, we have strong evidence that they are in this extinction vortex. So populations are declining. We have that affects breeding dispersal and inbreeding, population size, and overlaid on top of all of this, that barred owls and the continued stressors of habitat loss having a real detrimental effect on spotted owl populations. So the hard reality is that there are populations that are likely to be extirpated in the fairly near future. And so when you have very few animals, mark-recite methods just simply don't work. We get such wide confidence intervals that we can't really make inference from it. So the realities of the population conditions that we need to have some sort of adaptive monitoring approach. And so something that we've been thinking about going back into 2015, 16, having active discussions, could we potentially use passive acoustic monitoring to monitor spotted owl populations? And we could talk about this in bioacoustics. Bioacoustics, a type of passive acoustics focused on individual species. And we wanted to understand, what effort would be required to survey a 5 square kilometer hexagon with high detection probability? A graduate student, Layla Dukoch, that had worked on this starting in 2017, published this paper in the Condor a couple of years ago. And so the question is, why bioacoustics? So many living organisms produce sound. And so it can be effective for really any vocalizing species. And so because it's passive, we're just recording, so turning recorders on and off, setting them on a schedule, can be effective for multiple species. We can observe really complex interactions, not only within a species, but between species. Can be appropriate for rare species. It's totally non-invasive, and we can integrate it with other methods. So some of the work that we're doing already are integrating and co-locating these acoustic sound recorders with camera traps and also bat recorders that are recording in a much higher frequency range. It doesn't require as much crew field time, and it requires less field experience. The demography work and banding takes many years of expertise and training to be able to do banding for spotted owls. So, and long term, it can be cost effective, safer. We're not doing any night work anymore, having individuals work by themselves at night. It's all daytime work. And we can really expand this now, spatially and temporally. But there are some pretty significant challenges to go with bioacoustics. One is it can be very expensive. So the startup costs, especially if it's a large project, can be really quite expensive. It also requires a little bit of different approach in understanding how we draw inference to the population and potential change in the population. So in population parameters, and it's more about site level colonization, extinction, and then change in use, and make an inference about change in the underlying population. So we're not directly measuring survival, recruitment, and then not lambda estimates. So it is taking a sort of a change, sort of a paradigm shift in how we're thinking about the population. Generates very large volumes of data and it doesn't take a very large study at all. If anybody's done any bioacoustics work, you'll quickly realize that it's a lot of data, and listening is impractical, and there's challenges with data management, processing. When we started our work back in 2017, there was no auto ID available. And so we quickly realized that we were going to need to invest and develop some complex machine learning tools to be able to automate detections of spotted owls and a range of other species. So what Layla set out to do was quantify spotted owl detection probabilities, and barred owls, by the way, in 5 square kilometer hexagons. She had 30 of these spread out over 3 different study areas. These were all sites that were at least recently occupied. We were focused on detection probability. So spotted owls there, probability that we would detect them. So she had collected about 150,000 hours of sound recordings as or in the field crews, and scanning spectrogram using this sort of semi-automated process. There's a couple spectrograms here. There's a spotted owl on the top, barred owl on the bottom. And the spotted owl detection sheet, it collected a little over 20,000 detections, and then barred owls a little over 67,000. And then put those into weekly encounter histories, and then ran some basic occupancy models. And so some of the key things that she found was, one, background noise is really important in affecting weekly detection probability. So if it's a noisier area, have lower detection probability. So this could be a couple of things that are happening. One, spotted owls just call less often when in noisy sites, or it potentially could be that they're just being covered with the background noise, and we're just not able to detect those calls in noisy sites. She also found this distance, created this decay function of detection probability with distance away from an activity center. So it sort of makes sense intuitively. You get further away from an animal's core activity center, we have lower detection probability. But this has been a really important finding, and some of the work that sort of follows on from this early work from 2017. And so she also developed this power detection. This helps us to understand how we can use this work to develop a sampling protocol, more broad scale sort of protocol. So if you have, and just simply looking at the number of stations within a hexagon and then increasing the number of weeks, we get higher detection probability. So an example here is if you have one station, we had a weekly detection probability of 0.14. But if you extend that out and you do the survey for up to 6 weeks, we get detection probabilities that are near 0.6 or so. And our goal was to have detection probabilities at least 0.95. So what we've established from this early work is our sampling protocol calls for using 4 stations per hexagon and sampling for 6 weeks. She also found some really interesting things with spotted owls and barred owls. This is density plots of calling activity within the nighttime. So we've got sunset here on the left side, sunrise on the right side. Spotted owl calling intensity are in the light blue, barred owls are in that purple color. And what we see with spotted owls, they have this, most of their calling occurs at sunset and sunrise. We see this peak in calling activity, whereas barred owls have more of this sort of a slower ramp up and they're calling more often during the nighttime. Another interesting sort of natural history with spotted owls and barred owls is that we have more calling activity with the full moon. So the full moon, this is the lunar phase, and these density plots, so the full moon would be on the right side and the new moon there on the left. So both species are calling more often just before the full moon phase. Also found a really important finding is being able to determine at a particular site whether it's occupied by a pair or a single. And what she found is that just the overall number of detections in 2 of our study areas, the Coast Range and the Klamath, the spotted owl bars there in the black, the sites with singles are in the blue. And 2 of these study areas, clearly far more calling behavior in sites with pairs compared to singles. This didn't happen on the Olympic Peninsula, but there's unique aspects of the Olympic Peninsula population. There's very few individuals there. And then we couple this with a model we developed, and there's a paper that's in press now, to quantify the difference between male and female calls. And so we put this into our pipeline, not only the number of detections of spotted owls, but then whether it's male or female. And this has been really effective for us to be able to assign pair status at a particular site. Yeah, she also found some interesting aspects in co-occurrence detectability between spotted owls and barred owls. The first 2 that you see on the left-hand side, these are detection probabilities, weekly detection probabilities of barred owls. The first one on the far left, this is sites without spotted owls present. And we get a weekly detection probability around 0.55 or so. And then on sites where spotted owls are present, we see a little bit of a lowering of detection probability, but not really appreciable. So we didn't think that barred owls really have an effect on, or spotted owls are not really having an effect on detection probability of barred owls. Then we look at spotted owls, so sites where there's only spotted owls present, no barred owls. This is our detection probability. The point estimate is about 0.65 or so. There's very few sites where there are only spotted owls, so we got a really wide confidence interval. So we have a ton of confidence in that particular point estimate. But then if we break down sites where barred owls are present, but then not calling, that they, barred owls are here, but they didn't call during a particular week, we have detection probability for spotted owls declines to about 0.23. But then if barred owls are also calling at that time during that week, we actually see an increase in spotted owl detection probabilities. What we hypothesize is likely happening here is that these are mated pairs. They're actively defending their territory in the face of barred owls. So some of the key findings Layla had was that we get a high probability of detecting spotted owls, barred owls at multiple scales. It's good indications early on that it could be effective for monitoring and project level surveys. And then also determining pair status, and this detectability decay function is really important. Now you're going to see that next where this played a role. And some previously unknown calling patterns. So really interesting natural history aspects of spotted owls. So the next question we had was, well, can we monitor spotted owl populations? So we could effectively detect them if they're there, but then can we monitor their populations or range wide. So we set out to do this simulations to understand, one, can we monitor spotted owl populations effectively, and what would be the most effective sampling design. And our criteria is, one, to make sure we'd be able to detect a 4% decline, annual decline in spotted owls over a 10-year period with high confidence. So we're looking at accuracy of our estimates and also precision. So in these simulations, the way that they worked is that we had the starting population that we've simulated based on what we know about the conditions of spotted owl populations. We did this throughout the range and broke it down by different ecological provinces. And then we simulated a decline, or potentially it could be a population stability. But the animals are not, it's not only declining, but animals also moving around the landscape, because we know that breeding dispersal is a big effect now in the population. So you have birds that are moving around quite a bit. And then we simulate detections based on what we know with detection probabilities and this distance to gate function with detection probabilities. And we create these encounter histories and run occupancy models. We had various different sampling designs. We had really intensive sampling with a 20% sampling. We've gone to 10%. And these are just random selection of these 5 square kilometers hexagons. This is just in the federal land. So the maps that you see there, the different color polygons, those are different agencies that manage those lands, but these are all federal lands. And we go down to 2% sampling. We also had this design that was the 2 plus 20% sampling. And so this is a random 2% sample of our hexagons. And then within our historic demographic study areas, we have more dense sampling up to 20%. And this has some advantages for learning and some research opportunities. So this is a kind of a take home from these simulations, and I don't have time to go into too many details here, but we've got the 2% sample that's in the top left, and then we go down the top or the bottom right, the 20% sampling. We got different simulations. We've got 54 different scenarios that we're running, different lambdas of the underlying spotted owl population, 8% annual decline, a 4% annual decline or stability, simulations years 5, 10, and 20 years. And basically you'll notice there's some like cloud of points, and those are all of our different simulations that we had run and estimates that come from those simulations. And then we've sort of aggregated those to get the average from each of our different scenarios. And what you'll notice is that as you go into more dense sampling, that cloud of points gets much tighter. We kind of expect that, right? With sampling theory, and that you sample more, you get tighter estimates. One thing that we're really encouraged here is, so the truth is that dashed line and these different scenarios. And so what we would hope is that our points would land on that dashed line. And at least in our average estimates, really do a good job of detecting the underlying population, the truth in the population, just with simulated bioacoustics data. So the results here, what we ultimately landed on, and the recommendation that we made to the interagency executives, were to implement this 2 plus 20% design. It's the most cost effective. We can get detection change at the range wide and province levels. Get these dense sampling on these historic demographic study areas, provides a lot of opportunity for additional learning. We get high precision. And just an update, we're doing this 2%, this 20% sampling now. And then the plan is we do a full implementation of this design starting in 2023. And so going back from 2017, each year since then, we've continued to expand our effort in passive bioacoustics monitoring. We're now working in 10 different study areas. In 2021, we sampled 443 hexagons, and each of those have 4 points each, and a little over 1.2 million hours of sound recording. And we're going to have similar effort here in 2022. It's likely to be a bit more. So it's a lot of sound. We're well over 3 million hours of sound recording. You could do the math and figure out how long that would take somebody to listen to it, but it's impractical totally. So we take all the things that we've learned with bioacoustics, would agree with this quote that came from this paper that was published in 2019. And bioacoustics can improve decision-making, monitoring, conservation, and management of threatened species. We totally agree with that. We definitely saw that in some of our early work. But at this time, bioacoustics remains limited by the methods and technologies available to handle and process sound data. So we recognized this early on, and we really tackled this. And we did this by really investing in developing a convolutional neural network, and what we call the PNW CNET. And this has been primarily led by one of my research assistants, Zach Ruff. And as we wanted to, the goal of this is to be able to automate detection of owls and other species, and then be able to scale up our data processing and in preparation for range-wide monitoring, where we expect we're going to be collecting well over 3 million hours of sound every year, and minimize human supervision. And we've published some papers on this. You can certainly check those out. Just very briefly, this neural network is actually for image classification. So we convert our sound recordings, these wave files, to spectrograms. And spectrogram, of course, is along the x-axis is time, and frequency on the y-axis is an amplitude, it's kind of energy is indicated. And what you get is like different sounds that are rendered as these recognizable shapes. And these recognizable shapes are unique to individual or species. So we can now use this for species identification. And convolutional neural networks excel at image classification. Here's some examples for spotted owls and barred owls, some different owl species, some spectrograms that we have. And so you can see the differences then, northern saw-whet owl, quite different than other ones. There's actually quite a bit of overlap in spotted owl and barred owl, especially if you're only looking at single notes. So the neural network is real important that it be able to distinguish between these two species. So a little bit about CNNs, convolutional neural networks, is that it's versatile machine learning. It's been in active development for a couple of decades now, really leverages big data, and it's the state of the art in computer vision for image classification. It's in wide commercial use for facial recognition, self-driving vehicles. If you use Google Photos, and you can do a search of your photos for some keyword, and you don't have to tag them, but it'll come up. And the example is like if you go on a safari to Africa and you take a bunch of photos of different wildlife, you want to see all of your photos of elephants, and you can do a search for elephant photos and they'll pop up, and it's really effective. So neural networks can be, really effective. It can be a little bit of a black box, but in a nutshell, the image classification we want to be able to do is we feed into the network an image and then have it predict the correct label of that image. The network is constructed as a series of layers that process and transform the input from previous layers. And then they're built around these layers which detect simple visual features. So, and they build on each other, which is really good because as you move up through the layers, you can get more complex, see more complex features. Because these complex features are composed of simpler ones. For example, here, a photo of a barred owl, it's composed of a beak, a facial disc, talons, the barring of the spotted owl. And so the output from these neural networks is a visual or a numeric representation of meaningful features rather than surface stuff like the number of color pixels of a specific color or something like that. And then we can use this representation and predict the subject and the image. And so we can do the same thing with spectrograms. So we leverage this, and we found it to be quite effective. So our data processing approach basically is that we have our sound recordings, we capture that of wave files, we convert those into spectrograms, put those into short segments, 12-second segments. We classify those images with our PNW CNET, and then we have humans that review the apparent detections, especially for some of our really key important species. And then we condense those detections into encounter histories. And then we do our basic, so it becomes count data, weekly count data, and we can analyze those in various different ways. So we've had quite a bit of evolution of our PNW CNET. In 2018, we had version 1. We published that. It was just for 6 owl species, and we now have operated with version 4, working on version 5 now. And we've gone from 6 species now to 51 target classes. And here's some of our target species under PNW CNET version 4. So lots of owls, corvids, woodpeckers. We even have some mammals, and not listed here are wolves. We've got other birds. So marbled murrelet's another really important conservation management species in the Pacific Northwest. Several pasturings, and lots of nuisance sounds, and logging equipment, gunshots, sort of things. And so I just want to wrap up here and just give you a couple of examples of some applications where we've applied with these bioacoustics data. We're just starting some of this work, and a couple of my PhD students are working on applying using some of these acoustics data in various ways. So one, Kara Apple, she's a PhD student, and so she's built this a multi-state occupancy model for spotted owls. And the states here would be absent, and then single and pair. So those are our states. And this is really important, it has a lot of conservation implications, because forest protections are based on pair status. So if the agency wants to do a timber harvest, some timber project, they have to do surveys for spotted owls. And sites that with pairs are afforded more protections than sites that are either single or non-territorial singles. And these multi-state models are really versatile, and they fit well into these what we're trying to do with it, with management and conservation. And so the objectives that Kara had was to establish a framework for analyzing passive acoustic data for northern spotted owls. So not only this early work, but now we're thinking about analyzing monitoring data well into the future. And so we want to estimate detection and occupancy rates for single and paired owls, and probabilities that we misclassify pair status, and can also build in some covariates for environmental aspects. I won't get into this. I'm going to really focus on the probabilities and misclassifying pair status. So these are the study areas where she used data from. These are 2000 data that were collected in 2018 on the Olympic Peninsula and the Coast Range. It's a total of 207 hexagons. The green that you see on these maps are federal lands. And so just to reiterate kind of how we go through the data processing, we have the recordings, we put those in, make them into spectrograms. We run this through the PNW CNET. And then we also then, after the PNW CNET, we run through this linear model to predict sex of the calls, and then assign pair status. And what we found is that the sites that are where we have females detected, we've always had males detected. So females present is a strong indicator of pair status. Just a bit about the biology of the species. Females, especially when they're nesting, tend to stay very near the nest, don't call very often. The males are actively defending the territory. They range a bit wider, gathering food, feeding the female and the juveniles. But certainly during nesting, females are not nearly as detectable as males are. And then we then feed this into these multi-state occupancy models. And so some of the data that Kara had to work with, she had over 342,000 hours of sound that was recorded in this year, and then processed with the CNET. This came from a little over 1,000 ARUs. These are autonomous recording units. These are actually the devices that we deploy into the field. Those are 207 hexagons. So with spotted owls, there were about almost 1,500 detections. And it came from 34 different hexagons. This broke down into 112 female calls, 540 male calls that were confirmed. There were some that are lower quality. We know that they're spotted owls, but they were not high enough quality calls to be able to determine sex. And then 274 non-4-note calls that at least get to species identification, but not to be able to distinguish male and female. Barred owls, much more common, over 160,000 detections of barred owls, and 200 of our 207 hexagons. So we go as naive occupancy of 97.97. So barred owls are quite ubiquitous on the landscape, and there's some heterogeneity in the amount of calling, but they're virtually everywhere in the landscape. So this is kind of how we think about with these multi-state models. We've got our observation. So we've got your observed states weekly. So you could have no detections of spotted owls. You see these on the left-hand side here. You go out and you detect just a male, or you could detect a male and a female, and that would be state 2. But our true states are the same, where you have absence, we have just a single present or a pair present. And with imperfect detection, of course, there may be some mismatch between these. But, for example, if you have a site with a pair, you could be in any of the 3 observed states. And now we can break these detection probabilities out and understand what would happen if we do a survey and the results that we get from interpreting the likelihood from an observed state, what the true state may be. So this P1, this is the probability of detecting a single if it were the true state was a single. So weekly detection probability of 0.04. This goes up and you do a 6-week survey, you get up to about 0.18 or so. But then if you have a site that's where the true state is a pair, we get overall detection probability higher than we do for singles. So weekly detection probability is 0.18. But now what we can do is we can actually split this out. And we see that the probability that we observe a pair, if it is a true pair present, is much less likely than the observed state being a single. So we're more likely to observe state 1 than state 2 if the true state is a pair. And then we sort of roll this up into our occupancy estimates, is oftentimes what we're most interested in. So we have these are our naive results. So we had 173 of our hexagons, no detections, 28 we had a single, 6 of them had a pair. But then we include our estimates and we adjust those. And what we find is that many more of those we would have anticipated are actually occupied by a pair. It goes from 6, an estimate of 6 to 16. And so without accounting for imperfect detection, we likely would have missed 10 of the 16 hexagons with pairs. So this has some really important implications. If you wanted to do bioacoustics work, do a survey and just interpret observation about that, what is the likely true state in that area. So the conclusions from this is that passive bioacoustics plus neural networks and the multi-state occupancy models really provides this really powerful toolbox. And I feel like it shouldn't be, or you really can't overstate the importance. This is totally passive. We've not needed to harass the birds or capture the birds or do anything to the birds. It's totally passive methods, and really it becomes a very powerful toolbox. So, and the estimated occupancy by spotted owl pairs was 3 times greater than the naive detections. Barred owls are ubiquitous. They didn't have we didn't get much effect on detection probability of spotted owls. It could be there's just barred owls everywhere, but we did find some negative effect on occupancy and also on pair status. So what do? We go out and we do a survey for spotted owls and you detect just a single owl. So one key piece of this, the results of this, that correctly detecting a pair or a true non-resonant single is equally likely. So, and then observed singles have a high chance of belonging to an undetected pair. So 80%. So think about it, you go out, you do a survey and you detect just a single male. Well, there's an 80% chance that actually male is paired with a female and you just never detected the female. So this has really important implications for weighing the risk of misidentifying pair status. And so this will be something that the regulatory agencies will have to deal with and understanding to do passive bioacoustics, and may relax some of those requirements of detecting a male and a female for these sort of higher level protections at sites. And then I'll just wrap up this last bit here. Matt Weldy, another one of my PhD students, worked on this project in integrating historic territory occupancy data with the bioacoustics data, also in a multi-state occupancy framework. And it's demonstrating this as a framework for future work, especially as where we have overlap in demography and bioacoustics work, and how do we most make sense and integrate these and share information from these two disparate data sets. We had used data from the Coast Range. We had 175 territories. This overlapped 517 hexagons. And there are a few other hexagons that were not overlapped by territories. We still have the same state. So no detection, male detected, female detected. So same sort of a multi-state framework. I just want to show you this. This kind of demonstrates the challenge with this. So we have territories and we've got hexagons that are overlaid on top of these territories. The territories are those irregular polygons there, and then of course the hexagons. And so what we wanted to do is, to resolve this this mismatch is it's this modifiable aerial unit problem. So we're collecting data at different scales, and then so from the territory data, we recast that to the scale of the hexagon for the bioacoustics data, and then we calculate the area surveyed and use this as a non-stochastic offset in our models for both P1, this is detection probability of singles, and also P2, that's detection probability of pairs. And then so, yeah, the last bit here, we have our, these are some of the key results of this. We have, these are our detection probabilities of singles, so P1 that we see here, and we're comparing this, the bioacoustics on the top, territory on the bottom, and then and once we include the integrated data into this and these estimates, what we get. So we see that it's fairly similar estimates for detecting singles, whether it's from the territory surveys or the bioacoustic surveys. We do start to see some divergence in P2. So detecting pairs, we do a little bit better detecting pair use than does the territory surveys. And with the, we do start to see a little bit of divergence also in this delta parameter. This is the probability of detecting a pair given a single was previously detected. And so, in short, what we found from this work that Matt's working on is that this can provide a really flexible approach to integrate these data sets and harness the strength of these different data sets, and can be really effective for this transition period of the monitoring program. And the final conclusion here is that the bioacoustics is likely better suited for modeling use across the study area, both for singles and for pairs. And then with that, I think I'll wrap up and just say again, thank you. I very much appreciate the opportunity to talk here. Hopefully I have some time, and I just want to point out this has been a huge effort. I'm talking about this work, but there's been a lot of people that have played really critical roles into this, or people that are fully dedicated their careers to this project. Lots of funding agencies and many field and lab technicians. I have people that are out working in the field today, collecting data as we continue to move this forward. And also just want to mention too, is that hopefully you get the sense that we have on hand, and we will continue into the future, lots of bioacoustics data. And so always open to collaborations. People, if interested in soundscape modeling or different bioacoustics model, we have lots of species that we're working with. we're mandated for northern spotted owls and some with marble murrelets, but we're pretty wide open on other things. So definitely open to collaborations if any of this has piqued any interest for you. So with that, thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Damon? Please feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat and we can read them out.
Yeah, I have a question. Thanks, Damon, for the awesome talk.
Oh, hey, Stephen.
Hey, how's it going? I was interested in hybrids of spotted and barred owls, and I don't know how common they are, but are they having any noticeable effects on like demography by taking away, potential mates? And then also, can you tell those hybrids acoustically from the parent species?
Yeah, with your last question, first I'll say yes, we do have hybrids, and we do detect them, and they are distinguishable vocally. And there are hybrids that we detect. There are ones that are known. There's hybrids that we know. It's not it's not incredibly common to have hybrids, but it is possible, and the hybrids are reproductively viable, which is sort of interesting.
Great, thanks.
Other questions for Damon?
Hi, Damon. Great talk. So I know in the past they've considered doing lethal removal of barred owls for managing them. Is that happening? And if so, are you incorporating that into your analyses in any way?
Yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get into this, but yeah, I participated and collaborated with USGS on a barred owl removal experiment. That's work that had been ongoing. That the experiment has ended now. It's been published. We're still working on some analyzing those data and the effects of the barred owl removal. We have the acoustics data also with that, and that's actually incorporated a little bit into Matt Weldy's multi-state project, but I just didn't have, I knew I'd run out of time to talk about that. And then so the experiment, what we found is that it was a fairly short duration study. It's like maximum of 4 years. And think about with the long-lived species like spotted owls, and you do a removal of a competitor that may have an effect. There's several sort of stages that you would imagine positive effects of those barred owl removals. One is that you have more stable adult breeding, so more stability in territory occupancy, so not as much turnover in the territory occupancy. Then you need to be able to increase reproduction and then survival of those individuals, survival of the juveniles, and then juveniles to be able to establish territories themselves. So you can imagine it could take quite a long time to really start to see an effect into lambda, so a population change. But we found with the experiment, at least we got to the first stage. We have much more stability in those territorial pairs in the treatment areas compared to the control areas. So you do removals of barred owls, keep barred owls removed. We had some pairs that were displaced from the control area with no barred owl removals into the treatment area. And in the treatment area, maintained those pairs that were there before the experiment began. So we did see some really positive effects of the barred owl removal, but there's challenges with that, right? You imagine, barred owls are a cool bird. I grew up in Missouri and lived in the Midwest a lot of my life, and love barred owls, love seeing barred owls. They're just a challenge here in the Pacific Northwest. And then with management, so the Fish and Wildlife Services, they've assembled a team. They're working on developing what they call a barred owl management plan. And that will likely be, I don't know, I'm certainly not at liberty to talk about any details of that. That's far from being ready to be for public release, and there've been no decisions about it. But they are working on a barred owl management plan.
Very cool. Thank you.
Any other questions for Damon?
Hey,
Damon,
yeah.
I have a quick, oh, go ahead, Kiefer.
Sorry. Yeah, I just had a quick question. Thanks for your talk. It was really cool. So I know you don't work in any of those private thin lands, it doesn't seem like, but are those pretty much void of spotted owls, or will they still use those like suboptimal habitats? And do you think some of those patterns you're seeing on the public lands would hold out over there?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. I think you've hit on a really key piece of this. So what I've talked about and what we're mandated for and what we get funding for is monitoring spotted owl populations on federal lands. And you look at disturbances and you just look at a modeled spotted owl habitat, there's not a lot outside of federal land footprint. And so we think that it's probably best case, the best conditions are likely occurring on federal lands. And we interface in some of this work. You saw, I don't know if you remember this map I'd shown you with this ONC lands, kind of a checkerboard shape. You can see this from space, the effects of this checkerboard ownership where you have old forest and these, really intensive private forest lands. So we do observe spotted owls occasionally using the edges, and so may use some of these other lands for foraging and those sort of things, but we don't, we occasionally do see areas that are sort of set aside for riparian reserves, that sort of thing. They have nesting by spotted owls, but it's not as common as to having them nesting in these ancient old forests on federal lands.
Very cool, thanks.
I can jump in with my question now, Damon. Thank you so much. I wanted to say that I'm very excited about your work, kind of making monitoring more efficient. I'm really interested in that. And I guess one of my questions for you was about like the way that the regulatory agencies react to some of these new techniques. Like, what do those transition periods look like? And how much in-field validation do you get asked to do?
Yeah, great questions. One with the regulatory. So the primary regulatory agency that I work with is the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so we work with them very closely. I'm part of the working group and providing a lot of the science that's underlying a development. We actually have a protocol now using passive bioacoustics for project level surveys. And we've been working with them for this. And so this is being tested by some state, even private and federal entities trying this out using passive bioacoustics. And we're continuing to learn from that. And I would say that with change of any magnitude, and this is a massive change in spotted owls, and I think I would hopefully not understate that. This is a massive change in both regulations and consultations for spotted owls, but also monitoring their populations. And so with that, it does require a lot of education and learning along the way and patience. And I would say that the Fish and Wildlife Service have increasingly come to a place in understanding and agreeing the benefits of passive bioacoustics. We're continuing to work with them in interpreting those data, as like you saw from Kara's work. There can be a pretty significant mismatch of what you observe, the observed state, for what the true biological state is, especially if that biological state is the one that's the most important for protecting a particular patch of forest. And so, yeah, continue to work with them. We'll provide the information, and ultimately they'll make the decision.
That makes sense. Thanks so much.
Great. Well, for those of you still hanging on, what we're going to try to do is we're going to keep Damon on the line. We'll stop the recording and we'll keep asking him questions, and we can ask him